In the U.S., CBS News is under scrutiny after its parent company, Paramount Global, settled a multi-million-dollar lawsuit with Donald Trump, with names from the annals like Edward R. Murrow, Walter Cronkite, and news programs like 60 Minutes. CBS has been a pillar of American broadcast journalism, and it's at the heart of this story. Trump's lawsuit alleged that last year CBS producers deceptively edited an interview with presidential candidate Kamala Harris to make her look good. The out-of-court settlement cost CBS $16 million, while Paramount was chasing a multi-billion-dollar merger, a deal that the U.S. broadcast regulator, the FCC, had the power to block. So this settlement is seen as an act of political capitulation on Paramount's part, and CBS is not the only media outlet that Trump's been going after. He has also targeted the Wall Street Journal, a notoriously conservative outlet, for its reporting on Trump's ties to Jeffrey Epstein. He is suing the paper and its owner, Rupert Murdoch, for $10 billion. When political power comes into conflict with corporate power, journalism tends to become collateral damage. Joining us now to unpack all of this is Alex Shephard, senior editor at The New Republic. Alex, let's start with this. CBS News is one of those institutions that's long branded itself as a news division that speaks truth to power. But what's really happening behind the scenes there right now? What kind of pressure do you think CBS is facing right now, both from the Trump administration and under its own corporate masters?
The pressure that they're facing is, I think, an unprecedented assault on news organizations' ability to do their job, to sort of placate an administration that is increasingly hostile to them, and to ensure this $8.4 billion merger that will give Larry Ellison, a key ally of Donald Trump, enormous power over the institution. The institution is just being gutted wholesale, and you're seeing it across divisions, but I think especially at CBS News.
Just how politicized has the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, become in Trump's second term? Are we witnessing something completely different here, a new era of media regulation in the U.S. where federal agencies will be used this way to potentially punish dissent?
If you look back at Trump's first term, there was a lot of talk about the pressure that news organizations were under. But I think the story of that term was one in which those organizations bent but didn't break under that pressure. It was really just him tweeting nonsense in the middle of the night, trying to pressure these organizations. But now he's really using every bit of the federal government that he can to pressure these kinds of changes. So the FCC is a three-person board. There are two Republican appointees and one Democratic appointee. And what they're doing is essentially ensuring that the administration has what is in effect boots on the ground in CBS. They're forcing the news division to end all diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And I think most troublingly, they're also pushing for a quote unquote ombudsman, which is, I think, a familiar role for many news organizations. But what they really want is a bias moderator, somebody who can sort of give the administration's opinion on various news stories to effectively ensure that there's none of the critical coverage that you've seen of this president and this administration on news programs like 60 Minutes.
Let's talk about the Jeffrey Epstein story for a minute, because this story is clearly getting to Donald Trump. And also the Wall Street Journal angle, because that paper has really run hard with this. What does the Journal's aggressive coverage say about fractures between Trump and Rupert Murdoch, who most of the time are on the same side of things?
They've had a rocky relationship, but it's solidified at various points because Murdoch knows that he needs to make Trump's voters happy, to ensure that the sort of golden goose of his empire, Fox News, continues to print money as it has for many years now. But at the Wall Street Journal, I think there's a little more freedom for maneuver. And, that institution is one of the big kind of pro-free market, pro-free trade organizations in this country. And they've been very critical of the administration's economic moves, most notably his sort of tariff regime. But you're also seeing, I think, it's unheralded in a lot of ways, news division really outflank a lot of other entities like the New York Times and CNN on this story. They've pursued it doggedly. And I think it is a very, very damaging story for the president, not necessarily because we have any evidence of significant malfeasance at this point, but because the story that he's always sold, both to his voters and to swing voters, is that he's a different sort of politician, that everyone else in the government is corrupt and they're compromised in some way, and that you may not like his pugilistic and crass approach to politics, but it does sort of get results, and the results are weeding out this kind of corruption and self-dealing. Now, I mean, if you look at what Trump does, it's obviously a ridiculous argument, but it does have a lot of truck with these supporters. And what we're seeing now is, I think for the first time, a significant gap between Trump's own assessment of a story.
I know it's a hoax. It's started by Democrats.
It's fake news. It's being invented by his enemies, whether they be James Comey or folks at the Wall Street Journal, and his voters who are saying, hold on a second, this story seems pretty damning and we want more information. 80% of Republicans want the Epstein files released, and Trump is going against them right now. And you just haven't seen a situation in his 10-year political career where there's this much tension between the president and his base.
Now, we've seen Trump before use lawsuits. There's the CBS case we mentioned, the ABC News case from the election campaign, but he doesn't always follow through with the threat, right? So how exposed do you think News Corp really is at this moment? And what does it say about Trump that he feels the need to take Murdoch on in this way at this time?
Trump has wielded lawsuits throughout his career, this long predating his presidential career, to try to bully and intimidate rivals and opponents into getting in line. And so this is no different. But I think there are a couple key differences here. So the CBS lawsuit that we talked about earlier, that was a very, very opportunistically timed because of this merger. So David Ellison and the folks at CBS realized that they wanted to get this merger through. They were going to have to settle this completely frivolous and ridiculous lawsuit, which is exactly what they did. The merger is going ahead. That's how it works. And with this story with the Wall Street Journal, Trump is suing in part because he thinks it, is a declaration of innocence, which is ridiculous. I think the story itself it speaks for itself. It's very, very well done journalistically. But the idea here is to try to bully the Journal off the case because of that a high number. This is a $10 billion lawsuit. And so, I think that the goal for Trump here is to get some sort of settlement, or at least to create a kind of chilling effect within the Journal newsroom. We have not seen any evidence of that. They seem to be continuing to pursue this story. Now, the question here, which is the kind of the game theory at play, is, well, what does Murdoch ultimately do here? Because what we have seen move him in the past are threats to his key business, which is Fox News. So the lawsuit itself may not be the threat. I think the one question for Trump, and it's a card that he hasn't played yet, is if he can go after Fox News, which has covered the Epstein story much less than other mainstream outlets. If he can go after them, then you might see some movement towards settlement here. But this is not a lawsuit that is friendly to Trump, even though he's the person that filed it. Because when you go through lawsuits in this country, you have to do discovery, and discovery here would focus pretty heavily on Donald Trump's 20-year seemingly close friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, the most notorious alleged pedophile and sex trafficker of the 21st century in this country.
Okay, let's close with the bigger, more ominous picture here. Are Americans currently watching the collapse of journalistic independence in their country as billionaire-owned news outlets bend to political power? And is Trump, in effect, training the public, in a way, to normalize, or to see as normalized, this kind of abuse of state authority?
This story of Trumpism is one in which it's comforting to think that essentially this country was in good shape before he came along, and this sort of demagogue appears, and all of a sudden this sort of institutions that have upheld American democracy for 2.5 centuries start to crumble. But I think that that's not really true. I think what you have seen is instead a country with institutions that had been rotting to the point of near collapse for many years. You look at the situation in Congress, for instance, particularly since the Republican Revolution in 1994. You look at the judicial system, right, with a court system that has essentially given a green light to open corruption over the last 20 years. And again, a media institution that is increasingly controlled by either individual billionaires or by massive corporations. And Trump sort of came along and noticed that this infrastructure was all rotting, and I think started to apply pressure to it. And what you've seen is that start to crumble. And I think one of the really troubling things here is if you look at an organization like CBS, again, this is the home of Walter Cronkite, right? It's, in terms of broadcast media, the gold standard of American television. And it is now essentially remaking itself in the president's image. And the other issue here is that, there's not a robust independent media in this country. The media has been under, both economic, political, and cultural assault for the last 2 decades. And, it's at a point of near collapse right now. The story of the first Trump administration was one that was pretty good for a lot of independent media and mainstream media too, that they faced pressure from a demagogic president and succeeded, and they built audience from it. And people respected the media's ability to hold the president accountable. And what we're seeing, I think, is the opposite. It's a sort of it feels almost like a death knell, but it's not with a bang but a whimper for a lot of these institutions.
We're going to leave it there. Alex Shephard of the New Republic, thank you so much for speaking with us here at the Listening Post today.
Thank you.